We've got to come back together and work together to fight and make things happen.
Oh, you're talking about a free market, Topher. How can you do that? Imagine that. Imagine having some choice.
That trauma in my life just made me want to help and make a difference. That's all I knew, is that it will never happen again.
The Middle East is at war once again. We've all seen the images, and I'm not going to replay them here. You can watch that online if you want to. Suffice to say that the attack by Iranian-backed Hamas from the West Bank is nothing short of barbaric, with the death toll quickly climbing towards the thousands. But more shocking even than the deaths are the kinds of people being targeted. Civilians, music festival attendees. There's been over 100 people kidnapped and dragged away to face a fate that will, for some of them, no doubt be worse than death. It's a shocking reminder that for all of the advancements of the modern world, human nature remains as depraved as it ever was, and the atrocities of the past could just as easily become the atrocities of our time unless we're willing to stop them. But, and this is where I'm no doubt going to upset a lot of people, a great deal of caution, calm and level-headedness is required in moments like these. On the one side, we've seen Islamist regimes like Iran celebrate the attacks and the killings, and we've seen politicians throughout the Western world, including here in Australia, come out in support of Hamas. This isn't really shocking, though. We already knew that was going to happen. The justification used in the West is always arguments around who did what to whom historically. But nothing, and I mean nothing, can justify walking into a music festival and gunning people down at point-blank range. Nothing, and I mean nothing, no amount of historical injustice can justify kidnapping civilians. So nothing that I'm about to say should be construed as justifying this attack. It is barbaric. It is unjustified. I condemn it absolutely, and I support Israel in counter-attacking to secure its borders and to destroy the attackers. But there's a reason I talked about caution, calm, level-headedness. Because whilst no historical atrocity can justify this attack, there are people who are already trying to use this attack to justify future atrocities. Now, before you get mad at me, let me explain. Israel's ambassador to the UN has called this Israel's 9/11 moment, referring, of course, to the terrorist attack that killed thousands of people by flying commercial planes into the Twin Towers of the New York World Trade Center. And that comparison rings a lot of alarm bells for me. In a sense, he's not wrong. The 9/11 attack was, for all of its planning, barbaric. It was the intentional target of an enormous number of civilians for the purpose of spilling their blood. And as with the attack on Israel, 9/11 was celebrated by Islamists worldwide and justified even by many within the Western world based on who did what to whom historically. So the Israeli ambassador to the UN isn't wrong when he makes that comparison. And that's the problem. Because just as 9/11 was justified in the minds of the attackers based on historical wrongs, so it was then used to justify all manner of future atrocities, as the US invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and committed systemic war crimes with interrogations and black sites on the far side of the world, ostensibly fighting for their freedom. And all for what? 22 years on, after billions of dollars and a human death toll that will never be accurately known, Afghanistan is fully controlled by the very terrorists we went there to destroy. Iraq limps on as a failing state, and the world is no safer than it was. That's hardly value for money, much less value for the lives that were spent. The atrocities of the past cannot be changed. The atrocities of the present, like this attack against Israel, must absolutely be condemned and responded to by those being attacked, militarily, of course. I'm not a pacifist, and there are people who can only be made peaceful when they are shit scared of you. I get that, and Israel should do what must be done to ensure that Hamas is shit scared of them from now until the Messiah returns. But we should be very, very wary of repeating our past mistakes in response to 9/11. Be very wary of anyone using this attack to justify things like invading Iran. Yes, Iran is a horrible terrorist regime and the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. I get that. No argument from me. But we went into Afghanistan because they were harboring terrorists, remember? And we were told that without Afghanistan, the terrorists would have nowhere to run. But now those terrorists run Afghanistan. We went into Iraq because Saddam Hussein was a threat to us all. but he was actually installed there by the US to counter Iran, because Iran was a threat to us all. And why did Iran become a threat to us all in the first place? Because the CIA toppled their government and installed US puppets, and then it all went bad. Now, none of that history justifies what's happening now in Israel. They're two entirely separate things. But that history must inform how we now respond to this attack on Israel. The warhawks will call for regime change in Iran. The military-industrial complex will see the dollar signs. And patriotic Americans, good people, will line up at recruiting facilities to once again spread democracy one drone strike at a time. And in the end, it'll just be another Vietnam, another Afghanistan, another Iraq, another Iran. I don't like these people, these terrorists, these state sponsors of terrorism, and nothing I've said should be construed as supporting or defending them or their actions. But just as past atrocities and who hit whom first is no justification for the atrocities we're witnessing today in Israel, let's be careful not to use these barbaric, shocking atrocities, and they are, as justification for us to commit the atrocities of the future. Now, let's return our attention to Australia. Here's the news. Well, thank the dear Lord that the Voice vote is almost run and done. I would like nothing more than to have this off my TV screen, off my desk, off my list of things to do and talk about, but unfortunately, it is an important moment in history and one that we do need to pay attention to now that we're in the final few days of campaigning. Well, two people that have most certainly been on the campaign trail are Senators Sen Antic and Warren Mundine. They both join us here on the Aussie Wire. Thank you, gentlemen, both so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Topher. Thanks for having us. We're standing here in the sun and getting the message out. So there it is.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep my tan up. It's great. Me up here in Mount Bark was it.
Now you're
No
both handing out for the No campaign. Warren, if I could just start with you for a moment. This is obviously an issue that's very dear to your heart. It affects you and your family and your life in a way that it doesn't affect most Australians anywhere near as directly. You've also paid a very high price and been targeted in some very real ways for taking the stance that you have on the No side of the campaign. How do you feel it's going? Has it been worth it? Are you confident?
Oh, look, I'm feeling good.
Good.
I think we're heading in the right direction. You know, I've been all over Australia and seen parts of Australia I've never heard of before. But it's great to get out and meet people, shake their hands and have a bit of a chat with them. I love it. And the feedback has been really, really good. You know, but I'm enjoying it, and I want to do this because of principles. We've got to get the basic principles that, liberal democracy, everyone's equal. Everyone has opportunities to build their life. We've got to focus on the people who are struggling, not people like myself. I'm doing pretty good, and a lot of other Aboriginal people are doing pretty good.
Sure.
So we've got to focus on the strugglers. And this is what I believe in. And so even though there's some nastiness out there, I'm just fighting through it.
Hey, and Topher, I'm leaning into Warren, not because I love him, which I do, but just because the microphone's in this side.
No,
I'm getting very cozy.
Look, on TV, you have to get cozy on TV. It's absolutely true. Now, Senator Antic, obviously the Liberal Party eventually came out with a clear position on the Voice referendum. My understanding, and correct me if my memory is wrong here, you'd already come out with your own position on this, that you were in opposition to this idea of the Voice. We're now in the final stages. You're personally handing out. We have a senator representing the people of South Australia standing on a polling booth and handing out. There is a need for people to come and join you, is there not?
Yeah, look, there really is, Topher. I mean, this is the thing. The polls are heading the right direction. I think we've seen that. We've seen the news poll last night, which was really encouraging, but the job's not done yet. It's really, really not done. We need people to show up on the day. You've got to show up on the day. Register your vote no. But we need people to hand these things out. I know it's only a simple yes or no, but showing people that we're here to take them through that journey is really important. There's still a website you can go to, volunteerforno.com.au. We need people in the north of Adelaide and the metropolitan areas as well, but all across the country, basically, because we need people there to welcome people and pass on the message on polling day.
Now, Warren, if I can come back to you before we finish here. I know you gentlemen are busy and you want to get back to it, but Warren, just very quickly, there's been an accusation that the No campaign is just a say no to everything campaign. It's a status quo campaign, and if you're voting no, then it must be because you're happy with this difference in outcomes that we do genuinely see for people in remote communities versus the rest of Australia. I've listened to you speak. I heard heard you speak in Wodonga a few weeks back as you were pounding the pavement, travelling all over the country. I know that you have a very different view on this, but can you help us to understand what are some of the proposals and things that you would support, that you would like to see happen to actually start to close some of this gap?
Well, from day one, I've always made it quite clear that on the 15th of October, the nation's got to come back together. Whether it's a yes vote or whether it's a no vote, the people, we're in a democracy. They made their decision. We've got to come back together and work together to fight and make things happen. We've got people out there in this country who are struggling, that their communities are struggling. There's high crime, there's drugs and alcohol, there's no employment, kids aren't going to school, and that I've made a commitment that there's 4 pillars I want to work on, and one is accountability, which is about all the billions of dollars we spend every year. People should be made accountable for that money and get outcomes, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to get those outcomes. The other one, of course, is education. Everyone knows that you've got to get a kid to school every day and get them to school, because that's the door opener for a better life and better opportunities for them. So we've got to do that. The other one, of course, is economic participation, which is about a job. There's nothing better than you can do than get a person a job, because it changes their lives, their families' lives, their kids and grandkids' life into the future. And of course, the big one at the end is how do we work in these communities to make them safe, to make so people can come there and people who live there and have the same opportunities that every other Australian have.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both so much for making time in your day for us here at the Aussie Wire. Go well. I'm happy to put my own vote out there. I'll be voting no on the 14th because I believe there are much better ways that we can improve these outcomes, as you've just articulated there for us. So thank you both so much. Go well, and we'll talk again, I'm sure, after the vote and unpack what it means and how we can move forward.
Thanks, Topher.
Thank you.
Good on you.
Well, continuing our coverage now of the looming voice vote, and of course the theme that we have here at the Aussie Wire of ordinary people choosing to step up and try and make a difference. It's part of our philosophy, our beliefs of truth, freedom and hope so often coming from taking some level of action. I want to introduce you to someone that I've now known for many years and I'm very glad to call a friend. I've interviewed her before as Topher on my other social media channels, but this is her first time on the Aussie Wire, and I'd like to welcome Maya Tessa. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Topher.
Now, Maya, before we get to the issue of the moment, which is the voice campaign, the vote is only literally a matter of days away. It's on Saturday. Before we get to that, I'd like people to understand a little bit. I find you a fascinating person, an inspiring person. You literally just decided one day that you'd had enough and you wanted to do something about it. And you threw your hat in the ring politically. You've copped some hits since then. There's no sugarcoating it. You've invested an enormous amount of energy, an enormous amount of your own money into campaigns, and in some senses with not much to show for it. The cynic could look at you and go, oh, well, you've got nothing to show for all of what you've done. And yet you are soldiering on, and I would argue that the cynic would be wrong. You've got an enormous amount to show for it. But where do you sit with this? What got you into this, and where do you feel you're at the moment?
I think it was a lack of trust and a lack of transparency, and also just watching the community around me shrink, get divided, and looking for answers and not having any leadership. One thing this journey really taught me is the country is crying out for true leadership. It's crying out for accountability, and it's crying out for truth. That's the biggest thing, truth. And, it's really interesting that we use that word because, again, it's been used so much by the yes camp, truth. But that is exactly it. They know that's what their constituents want. It's what I wanted. And I didn't trust anyone anymore. I could only trust myself to find that out and be an honest voice. I don't need anything. I've worked my way up. Me and my husband worked our way up from nothing. I was born in the middle of a civil war. I've seen atrocities. My heart is with my community. My heart is with all communities. And for me, we need to get true representation, honest representation that says, I don't want to be here, but I have to because no one else is going to do it.
So coming to the yes, no, the voice debate, etc., there are people who would argue that the voice is designed to do exactly that. It's designed to be the voice of a particular community. You are opposed, though, to the voice. Why is that? That could be argued that that's a contradiction there.
a lot of people don't know how to take me. They think that because I'm a vegan, I come from the left. But because I, really believe in not a full capitalist society, but a capitalist society, nevertheless, that I'm right wing, I'm not. I'm centered. All my opinions come from my own. So one of the very first things I did when The Voice came out was read the report, 276 pages, lots of pretty artwork. And I went, okay, now let me read it again with what would I want to know about it. So going in there with the actual mind going, okay, these are the answers that I wanted. And there was no answers in there. There was nothing that gave me the trust, the truth of what this voice body would be. Now, had they have said, hey, we're going to legislate it, I would have gone, yeah, not a problem. Because legislation is different to putting it into our constitution. Our constitution is our governing body. Our governing document. All laws go back to that document. We've seen the failures within the Aboriginal communities. We've seen the needs. We've seen what's coming out of Alice Springs. What we're doing right now isn't working. And yes, we need to do something different. But how do we know the next thing's not going to work either? We need to make sure that before we put it into our constitution and say, hey, this particular race, the Aboriginal people, will make sure they have to have representation, make sure that they have to have their say in whatever, because that's exactly what the final report says. Even on page 16, I believe, under the title scope, it has a dot point in there that says they can make representations to non-government entities, including business and corporate. So they're not telling the truth. And so why would we put a lie into the Constitution? And on top of that, a lie that divides us by race. It's horrible. I was born in Lebanon. Lebanon had the civil war. And after that, everyone wanted to make sure that it would not happen again. So what did they do? They put in a voice type installment into their constitution based on religion, not race. You can't get anything done in Lebanon. Their bureaucracy in Lebanon is ridiculous. The only way you get something done is not because of what you know, it's who you know.
Sure.
I've seen it, and it's the people that suffer on the ground. It has not made a single difference to our lives. So why would I want to bring that to my home in Australia?
Now, before we get to what you're doing on the ground right now, which is what I want to finish with, and I do want to talk about that, but I kind of want to rewind a little bit. When in answering my question about sort of what got you active, you talked about the loss of trust and the sense that you weren't being told the truth, etc. And obviously you've now mentioned your background, your childhood and where you've come from. But was there a period in between those two where you did have trust? I mean, there are a lot of people who just believe what they're told. A politician speaks up and they say, well, or a bureaucrat speaks up and they say, well, they must be telling me the truth. The government wouldn't lie to me. Can you relate to that? Did you have a period in your life where you felt that way and you've changed since then, or have you always had that skeptical thread?
I've always been skeptical.
Okay.
Because I saw the trauma when I was little. And I used to wonder, why was that happening? Why were children dying in school buses? Why were people opening the door to get shopping and being blown up? Why? These people were mothers and fathers, aunties, uncles, sisters, brothers. They were somebody's family. And for no reason they died. So for me, coming into this world, it was very, very, very important to know the truth. Because how can I help people without it? And that's all I wanted to do. After that trauma in my life just made me want to help and make a difference. That's all I knew, is that it will never happen again. And I'll tell you actually a really interesting story. I was telling a school mum the other day, when my children were little, so up until about 4 years old, every birthday we used to do a birthday give, and I'd take them down to the city, and the give was they'd get to, buy lunch for a homeless person. We'd sit down and talk with them. Anyone they picked. They could pick anyone, and sometimes they picked lots, and sometimes, I'd have to tone it down, say, we've got to go. But my second son, third child, Mark, he would have been about 3 years old, and he saw two Aboriginal men sleeping in boxes in between two buildings. And we were just going for a meeting that day. It wasn't actually his birthday. And I saw them out of the corner of my eye, and he saw them, and he goes, Mummy, I go, yeah. He goes, why are those daddies sleeping in boxes? He didn't see them as homeless people. He saw them as someone's parent, a father figure, because, you know, that's
grown men.
Older men were father figures. Exactly. And I went, yep, you're right, mate. We'll go get them something. And then when we went to our quick meeting, got the food. By the time I came back, the police were putting on the rubber gloves, getting ready to move them on. And my son looked at the police and he looked at me and I just went, boys, I'm really sorry. You're going to have to move out the way. We're feeding. It's lunchtime. And he sat down and they ate their lunch because it was hot. And the police just stood there. And I said, no one's to interrupt them. I'm sorry. And he asked them all these questions. And so for us, it's always been natural. It comes through my genetics. It comes through my grandfather, God bless his soul, that we really are just a family that just wants to make sure that we give back.
Now, that's been my experience with you. I mentioned in the intro, I've known you now for a number of years. I think you're quite an incredible human being. So all of what you've said checks out. All of what you've said is consistent with what I know you to be. So tell me about what you're doing now in terms of supporting the No campaign. We understand a little bit about why you've chosen that side of the campaign. But in practical terms, what can someone actually do?
In practical terms, we need people on the ground. That's what we need to do. I had a conversation this morning with a mum from the school, and she said to me, oh, Maya, I don't know anything about this voice referendum on Saturday. She goes, I don't know anything. She goes, I've tried to look, I can't find anything. She goes, but I don't want to be a racist and vote no.
Yeah.
She goes, can you help me?
Yeah, wow.
And I explained to her the exact story that I just told you guys, about the Lebanese constitution, about the constitution being our governing document, yada, yada. And she went, why would anyone vote for that? I said, exactly right. So if you guys want to help, we really need boots on the ground. And Fair Australia are still taking volunteers. You can register with them. It comes straight through to our electorates, whichever ones are, and because it's not a Liberal Labor thing. It doesn't matter how much they're trying to put it that way. It's not. We have good people from all sides of politics saying, hey, we want to make sure that this country stays on track of being united. Because 10 years ago, 20 years ago, yes, there were still problems in Aboriginal communities. There were problems in most vulnerable communities, which include our inner metro communities. I mean, go and see the homeless problem there. But we were united. We knew if someone was going to be racist and we called them out on it. Right now, we can't. We can't even open our mouths because we will get attacked. Everyone has been put under an umbrella and we have to stop the division. So go on to, I believe it is, just bear with me, I'll confirm it because I don't want to get it wrong, australiafair.com.au.
Australiafair.com.au. We'll put that in the description of the video.
Yeah.
Well, Maya, thank you so much for this interview. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. I look forward to keeping in touch with you and keeping tabs on where you go next and what you do next. I have a sneaking suspicion that one day I'll be introducing you as Maya Tessa MP or MLC, whatever the case may be. We're not there yet, but I look forward to following your story and your journey. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Aussie Wire.
No, thank you very much for having me, Topher.
Well, here at the Aussie Wire, we've been following along a story that has global implications, and today we bring you an update that is very much local. Our correspondent Joanne Nova has brought to our attention the implications of ESG, the environmental social governance scores that massive global investment funds are kind of pushing onto a lot of different companies. Well, it seems like that problem might have come a little closer to home, and Joanne Nova joins us now to bring us an update on this story. Jo, welcome to the Aussie Wire once again.
Thank you, Topher, because this story is this close to my heart. I think this is one of the ones that's driving so much of the madness we see around us. You know, you watch the news and you think, why on earth is the head of, pick a big company saying we have to get net zero and we need to do this witchcraft and change the weather? And, why are people who would normally be sensible, the big miners, the gas industry, why do they seem to be so on this bandwagon to do with the climate change thing? And this is the reason. The enormous funds that invest in these companies can vote directors out at board meetings, and they are telling these directors, these huge funds, and these are pension funds, so they're using your money to do it.
Sure.
They threaten these directors that if they don't get a good enough action plan and speak loudly about, solving the climate problem, that they will vote them out at the next board meeting. So the next AGM. So what we've got here is a huge, it's a big club to beat people down with, and they're isolating out any director who speaks up against this. So, here's how it works. Any crazy director of a BHP or whatever who thinks I might speak up and say, well, this is all silly, the idea that we can change the weather by putting up wind farms and things like that, they would get picked out by these giant superannuation funds who would then arrange a campaign to get rid of them at the next AGM. So we've got a direct line of money here, but the people who are in these funds, and I'll name them, this is the Australian Retirement Trust, ART. It's a $260 billion fund, Australia's second largest superannuation fund. That's 2.2 million members. Another fund is called Hester, $76 billion fund with nearly 1 million members. And they're mostly from health and community service, those members. Yeah. And just the same as we saw in the US, these funds are using their members' superannuation as part of the club to beat these directors down with. But they're not asking their members, is this what you really want? Do you care about this? And do you mind us using your super funds as part of the threat to drive ESG changes in these companies and to silence and censor anyone who disagrees? Well, and to me, that's the real weak point. It's a bluff.
Well, the extraordinary thing is because they have so much money, and we can thank former Prime Minister John Howard for expanding the superannuation scheme and making sure that these people have these tens and indeed across all of them hundreds of billions of dollars to play with. Because they have a significant shareholding in so many different companies, they have this very rare thing. They have a genuine ability to end somebody's career because they can't just get them kicked out of the company where they're a director right now, but they can effectively blacklist them out of any of the companies in which they are significant shareholders. So that gives them an enormous amount of power, but it raises for me an interesting question. Where is the line between being a shareholder and obviously wanting to see directors do good things for your company and just outright almost blackmail and standover tactics? I mean, it is a little bit mafia-esque, is it not?
It is absolutely acting a bit like a cartel, especially when they all band together and say publicly, we're going to do this. But it's also, it's such a false thing to use other people's money to do this. And that's where we get back to fiduciary duty. And the aim of a super fund is, of course, supposed to be making its members richer so they can afford to retire for longer. And that was always the plan. But if these funds are going on a quest to change the global weather in true witch doctor kind of style, it may come at the expense of your retirement funds. Now, so here's what we need people to do. We need people to actually look up and check, is my retirement fund using these funds against me? I might be voting for lower energy costs. I might be hoping that we get a government that will solve these problems. But on the other hand, all my retirement savings for life that I've been forced to put into this fund are being used as a club to beat down these directors who dare to speak up and say the wrong thing. So the answer is people need to change. They need to check and they need to pull their super out of these funds, or at least send a letter to the super management saying, are you doing this? Is this, and to pressure those super funds into behaving as they should be behaving to look after their money rather than to use their money in a quest to bully companies. So this is really important. And when we look at ART, I call it unguarded money, this retirement fund money, because the government takes it off people when they earn it and sticks it straight into the fund. You don't get a choice. A lot of people just switch off. They don't pay attention. It's their money, but it's being used against them. And the Australian Retirement Trust, I think, was formed from two other funds only a year ago, and yet it's the second largest fund in Australia. And a lot of people wouldn't even be aware their funds were in the Australian Retirement Trust. So you really need to pay attention here. Where has that money gone?
Well, the question that springs to my mind, and I don't have an answer for it, so I guess this is kind of a question to our viewers, is are you aware of any superannuation funds that aren't playing these games? Is there a pro-human superannuation fund out there? Is there a super fund? Have you heard of vice funds, Joe? Is that a term that you're familiar with? The idea of a vice fund?
No, I'm thinking
Okay.
of the Strive Fund set up by Vivek Ramaswamy in the US to profit from it.
Yeah.
So I know there are a few funds, but in Australia, I'm not sure. And would they be allowed to mention that in the news?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, a vice fund, the whole concept is that there are certain things that human beings just do in good economic times and bad. So they'll invest in gambling and prostitution and alcohol and tobacco and all those things in any ways that are legal in their particular jurisdiction, because the theory is that no matter how bad things get, people are going to still spend money on that. I'm not proposing that, but I'm thinking, what about like a CO2 fund, a fund that specialises in supporting businesses that are going to help put carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere so that our biosphere can improve its health?
Oh, you're talking about a free market, Topher. How can you do that? Imagine that. Imagine having some choice. And imagine having a media that actually reported this fund so that people were thinking, well, do I really want my superannuation in that? Or can I invest in a super fund, which is like coal mines? Because I think that would be a better option for me and I'll get more money out of it when I retire.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, we're just going to have to watch how this plays out. I thank you for bringing this to our attention. This whole ESG thing is fascinating. The way that it's starting to interact with insurances is fascinating, but it's going to be a story that we're just going to have to keep covering and keep touching on from time to time as time passes. So, Joe, sorry, you've got more?
Just to press that button, environmental investors last year lost 22% compared to energy investors who made 54%. Now, last year was an extraordinary year because of the war in Ukraine and the price of coal and oil and whatnot. But it can make a very big material difference to your life if you do pay attention to where your retirement funds are and ask your fund whether it supports any of this kind of coercion and bullying, in order to get the mythical witch doctor craft of changing the weather 100 years from now.
Moving that thermostat. Well, Joe Nova, thank you so much for the update. We will be staying across this story with your help as time goes by.
Thanks, Topher.
This is the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com. Be sure to sign up for our email list while you're there. Follow all our socials via @theaussiewire, and please support us by becoming an insider, a financial supporter of the Aussie Wire. The link for that is in the description. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.